vegetarian or vegan?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Simply from a health standpoint, it becomes very difficult to get the adequate amount of protein that you need. It's possible, right? It's not that it's impossible, but it becomes very difficult to get the amount of protein that you need in order to sustain that diet. You have to eat large, just voluminous quantities of food to match the amount of protein that you need on those diets.
Hey, I'm Dr. Ben Cilento, and we are here with Dr. Lee Mandel and the excellent Brandon Ward talking about the new food pyramid. America is getting fatter since the introduction of our first food pyramid in 1992 and the MyPlate version of it in 2011. We have more chronic disease, and for the first time for the last 3 years, we have been decreasing in our average lifespan. Part of it's nutrition, and I think that the recent January 7th, 2026 new food pyramid that's come out by RFK and the government is a hot topic, and it's something that we're going to tackle today. Dr. Lee is going to introduce Brandon, and we're going to get started. Dr. Lee?
I am honored and delighted to introduce my good friend and personal trainer, Brandon Ward. Brandon will be on some of our other podcasts, so look out for him. He's really a wealth of knowledge. He's a former Division I collegiate athlete. He spent the last 18 years bridging the gap between high-performance athletics and everyday health. He holds dual master's degrees in injury biomechanics and exercise physiology from Florida State University. He makes him a go-to resource for training that is both effective and safe. He's a certified strength and conditioning specialist and level 2 nutrition coach. He doesn't just guess, he knows. He's currently a gym owner and health coach dedicated to helping people build stronger, resilient bodies. If you happen to live in South Florida, the name of Brandon's gym is the Ludus, and it's located in Weston, Florida. Brandon, great to have you again.
Thank you very much, Lee. Happy to be here.
Brandon, as we get started, why don't you just tell us what is the food pyramid and what are the big changes from the previous pyramid?
Okay, so the food pyramid are dietary guidelines that, in a visual image, that the FDA and USDA put out to kind of guide us in terms of how we should be eating as Americans, quote unquote, healthy diet. The old food pyramid typically had, if you can visualize this, it had, I want to say, sugars and oils at the very top. And as it got larger, you kind of went down to vegetables and fruits and proteins.
Well, no, the old pyramid still had it on the bottom, but the base was large, so it had like 40 to 60% on the bottom of sugar, carbohydrates and grains and things like that.
Correct.
So it just flipped it upside down, right? It just kind of inverted it.
Inverts that. And so the most important, or the top part of that, is going to be your healthy fats, healthy protein, and things like that. So ideally trying to get as much protein and healthy fats into our diet as possible and limiting those grains at the bottom.
And so what are the new guidelines for protein now? The old guidelines were basically just to keep you from starvation. What's the new guidelines that RFK put out?
Yeah, the old guidelines are pretty much trying to keep people from dying of starvation, right? It was the bare minimum that you needed, and that was 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. The new guidelines are actually what we would tell people when they were trying to gain muscle mass or to be healthy. So the new guideline currently is 1.2 grams, 1.6 grams per kilogram body weight.
Wow, that's doubling of your protein.
It's almost double. Yeah, it's double.
Yeah. And how many servings a day are you supposed to have of that?
I think their new guideline servings is going to be at least 5.5 ounces, or roughly around 5.5 ounces at each meal.
Interesting.
It doesn't say specifically how many servings that is, but that's going to be dependent upon how many meals you eat.
On your body weight, right?
That needs to be about, it's going to be based on your body weight.
Interesting.
So people who are lighter, children, women, etc., are going to eat a little bit less. Men are going to eat a little bit more. But trying to understand having those healthy portions and making sure that that is the foundation of your nutrition, as opposed to the grains and the carbohydrates, is going to be the more important
So they
part.
flipped this thing on its head. Now the top portion that was the meat that was real small before is the largest portion, meat, fish, protein, fats, healthy fats, right? What do they talk about? What's happened to the carbohydrate portion? On the bottom, the carbohydrate portion was the largest, 40 to 60% of the dietary intake. Now, what is it
And
now?
now that's
Yeah,
tiny.
it's tiny now, right?
It's very, very, very small. Yeah, it's almost, I think they said no more than 6 servings. It might be even less than that, but it's the smallest portion. So it depends on the type of food that you're consuming. So I would say for carbohydrates, typically what we would say an uncooked cup of rice or pasta in a cupped hand would be about a serving. So that ends up being about a quarter to a half cup uncooked, which yields a cup cooked, which is a lot. That used to be the serving recommendation.
Holy crap.
At a bare minimum.
Everybody who's
Yeah.
cooked rice knows how much a tiny little bit of rice becomes when you put it in that little that instant cooker.
When you add the water to it.
Yeah.
Correct. And so I would say the new serving guideline is going to be at least half of that. So you're looking to a quarter cup uncooked, which is going to be a half cup cooked typically.
Wow.
And I would say that ideally would be your day's consumption of carbohydrates, not per
And they
meal.
still stress fruits and vegetables at a healthy amount, correct?
Yeah. And fruits and vegetables are going to be at a serving clip as well. So you want to have about 6 servings of fruits and vegetables a day.
So the first thing is, I think it's going to be a little confusing for people when we're talking about servings, right? So they just throw out there the term servings without explaining what a serving is.
Yeah.
A serving to me,
And how it varies to you. Like what
right?
does it mean
A serving
to
to me is definitely going to be different than a serving to Dr. Ben. I've seen
Yeah.
Dr. Ben eat steak, right? And a serving is 36-ounce
the
porterhouse. right?
Brontosaurus burger for those of us old enough to remember the Flintstones.
Yeah, so you can have some general guidelines when it comes to servings that are going to help people. So when you're talking about protein, a protein serving is going to be somewhere between 4 and 6 ounces normally for everyone. So on people on the latter side, you want to have about 3 to 4 ounces. So women, 3 to 4 ounces of protein as one serving.
Got it.
Men are going to be 5 to 6 ounces of protein in one serving.
And how big is that?
If you want to see what that looks like, if you take your hand, the palm of your hand is about the size of a flat hand. So palm of your hand, that is going to be about the size of protein that you should have.
That's like a New York strip for me.
There you go. And using that, because it becomes relative to the individual that's consuming it, actually helps them be able to understand exactly what that serving size should be. And the same thing with a cupped hand for the carbohydrates, trying to do half of a cupped hand for carbohydrates as you're serving. When it comes to fruits and vegetables, it's going to look like the individual fruit and vegetables. So a serving of a banana would be 1 banana or 1 apple or 1, clementine. However, when you go to something like strawberries or berries, that's going to be, again, that half cup serving of a cupped hand.
Am I going to be the one to say this? I mean, this looks like the Mediterranean diet. I mean, what am I missing here? This looks like we're moving towards a more Mediterranean diet, which is what so many people have been pushing. People from carnivore to keto to paleo, low carb, high protein, lean proteins, and healthy vegetables. I mean, what am I missing?
No, we're definitely shifting away from that SAD diet, that standard American diet, and into the Mediterranean and a healthier lifestyle for sure.
So how do you eat? What do you do for yourself, Brandon?
My personal focus and for me and myself and my family, and even what I teach clients, is the Mediterranean diet, for lack of a better term. It's prioritizing lean proteins, prioritizing healthy fats, having carbohydrates in moderation where necessary, but most oftentimes not really having many carbohydrates, but also making sure to have a lot of fiber. So fibrous vegetables, fibrous fruits, trying to stay away from those simple
So
carbs.
as an expert, somebody who's studied this and has a degree, but more than that, lives the lifestyle, you've been doing this before the new pyramid came out. You've been doing this years before it came out because you're in good shape, obviously. So
Yeah, we've been doing this and pushing this to people for a while.
So you already knew this. In fact, most health experts knew this long before the horrible food pyramid came out in the 90s. By the way, I was in school in the 70s and 80s, so was Dr. Lee, and I remember everybody being fit. We didn't have a weight problem back then. Introduced the food pyramid, and America's weight did this. And so I think it's a great thing. I mean, I know there's some controversy over it, but I think that the introduction of this is aligning with what most health experts have been doing and believing for the past 30 years. Am I wrong?
And to kind of comment on how that actually occurred, is that when they started promoting this low-fat concept, decrease your fats as much as possible and maintain relatively high carbohydrate
Yeah, they were demonizing
levels.
fat. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Well, so what happens when you eat carbohydrate that is unaffected by fat? In other words, you're eating the carbohydrate by itself and not introducing the fat. The carbohydrate has an unfettered access to your bloodstream, crosses the gut barrier very, very quickly, very, very easily. If you take the carbohydrate and you mix it with fat, the fat acts almost as a barrier to decrease the amount of carbohydrate that's absorbed. So really, that food pyramid, that old food pyramid, caused the obesity problem that we have now. 75% of the American public is considered clinically obese.
Yeah, that's right.
That's unacceptable.
Including our young people, including our children. Children are obese now, which they never really were before. I think it was less than 10% before. Now it's like 60%.
And if you talk about, going back to what Dr. Lee said, is when you look at taking or demonizing fats and what they did with the older food pyramid, a lot of what happened with the food manufacturing came to these low-fat foods, right? These processed foods that removed fat from that food. But oftentimes what they did in order to maintain the same nutrient content or macronutrient calorie content, they introduce added sugars.
To make it palatable, so people, I mean...
Make it palatable, make it shelf stable, all of these things. And that actually helped increase. And so when you talk about the physiology part of that, our body absorbs carbohydrates, simple diffusion, right? There's carbohydrates out there. It kind of goes into the cell. When you add that fat, our body naturally wants to attack things that are going to require more effort to get through. So if you're drinking a protein shake versus eating your steak, the nutrients from that steak are going to be more bioavailable and absorbed faster or more efficiently rather than that protein shake. It's the same thing when you're removing the fat from the carbohydrate meal. If the carbohydrates are by themselves, they're just going to flood into the system. However, if you add the fats into there, or add a protein into it, your body's going to want to break down those nutrients that are more complex first, which limits the absorption of that carbohydrate.
Brandon, that's fantastic. What's this going to do to the American grocery store? It's going to flip it on its head. I mean, the American grocery store has row after row after row of grains, breads, cereals. The American grocery store is basically a microcosm of this pyramid from the 1990s. What's this going to do to how our grocery stores are laid out in the American breakfast?
And hopefully the goal is that they change, right? You would hope that you limit those aisles of the pastas, the rice, the breads, the carbohydrates, the breakfast cereals, and you start to prioritize instead of, having rows down the middle that make up majority of the store with all of these things we shouldn't be eating and keeping all the healthy foods on the outside of the aisles, is that those outside foods, those vegetables, fruits, the lean proteins and healthy fats become the majority of the store. Right. And you may have only 2 or 3 aisles of those processed foods and those carbohydrates that are sitting in there.
Here's the problem. Ultra-processed carbohydrates are cheap to make and very shelf stable. A lot of money is made from ultra-processed carbohydrates. I don't see anytime soon that changes. I think there's going to be an incredible amount of pushback if we change the grocery store to look like the new food pyramid. Prices are going to go up. People aren't going to be happy about that. That's my take.
That's a great point. But at least we have a guideline now that reflects reality. And so we can start to find new ways for companies to change how they manufacture and then distribute. Because it's about the manufacturing, storage, and distribution, right? That's the problem. What you were alluding to, shelf stable. I mean, if you have large warehouses around the country that supply food to the cities that we live in, they have to be able to be stored for a while in order to distribute properly. So it's not so easy. I think this is like turning a battleship. This is not going to be we're not going to be able to pivot on this as easily as we think. But I think it's a good start, in my opinion.
So I want to touch on fruits. I have a little bit of a bugaboo about fruit because
he's got a banana in his bonnet.
People talk a lot about, oh, you have to have your servings of fruit. Fruits are so good for you. They're so good for you. And I look at what the public considers a fruit, okay? Things like, for example, watermelon, things like oranges, as being just bigger sugar storages, okay? Just tons of sugar. Fructose is a sugar. And there are certain fruits that I think offer greater benefit that have antioxidants, for example, berries and that type of thing. And obviously there are some fruits that the general public looks at as, oh no, that's a vegetable. But when we're looking at the food pyramid, they consider it a fruit, for example, like tomatoes, avocados, those types of things. So, Brandon, talk me through that. What really is a good fruit?
Larger good fruits are going to be your antioxidant fruits. It's going to be your berries, things like that. Things that we eat with the peel on, because that's important for that fiber piece. Typically, when you see the fruits that are going to be negative for our blood sugar, negative for our health effects, are going to be things that we peel. So it's going to be your bananas, your oranges, your citrus fruits. They're going to be really, really high in that sugary content that aren't going to have the fiber to slow down that absorption.
One exception to that, Brandon, is the avocado, which is technically a fruit. It's a large berry, but we do peel it. But I heard you say before that you like avocados, and I'm with you on that. But people don't know that it's a fruit.
I don't count it as a fruit, even though technically it is. But I eat at least one avocado a day.
Absolutely.
It's a healthy fat, and it's great.
A lot of times they say that that knowledge is knowing that avocado is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad.
So, Brandon, how about juices?
Juices are taking the fruits and removing the fiber. It's almost like a sugar bomb to your system.
So people really should not consider drinking juice as being, quote unquote, a serving of fruit under the food pyramid.
No, definitely not. Drinking your juice is definitely not a serving of food. And then drinking a juice is, again, a sugar bomb to your system that's going to spike that insulin and kind of throw your system all out of whack.
So talk to me about what is the best diet out there then. Given this new food pyramid, I know how you eat, but you have the public coming into, you have client base that mimics our patient base to a certain extent. So with everybody coming in, you don't just create clones of yourself. What's the best diet out there for folks, given, American diet, people are resistant to a lot of change. What do you tell them to do, and how do you tailor it for your clients coming in?
The most important factors are going to be to prioritize protein at every meal, limit simple sugars where you can, and add in and prioritize vegetables and fiber. Those are the three pillars that everyone needs to make sure that they're at least getting the nutrients that they need to promote a healthy lifestyle and sustain. We can talk about the specifics in detail, but generally prioritize healthy lean proteins at every meal from good sources, making sure to get a lot of fiber and vegetables in your diet, and limiting simple carbohydrates.
So I think it would be a good idea, since people really like to have labels, right, for what they're doing. It makes it easier for them to conceptualize why they're eating something and have, quote unquote, a plan. So let's go through some of the diets that are out there that people are exposed to. So you already spoke of the Mediterranean diet. So we know that lots of vegetables. If you're going to eat grains, they need to be whole grains, nuts, oils. But when we're talking about oils, we're talking about olive oil, right? What's going on with seed oils? Because we're hearing a lot about seed oils.
I don't typically ingest seed oils. When you're going out to restaurants, you're going to places that are preparing food, you're not going to be able to dictate what they prepare that food with. But by and large at home, not cooking with them, not using them. When I do cook with oil, I usually cook with avocado oil because it has a higher smoke point. I'm using olive oil to finish foods and finish salads and top things. But those where the oils come in. But I forget, what was your larger question?
It was really, I was going over the Mediterranean diet and kind of went off a little bit, but I'm going to go off a little bit again. Do either of you use beef tallow? Because that's become really popular as well.
Dude, I make it.
Yes.
We make it at Cherry Block in Katy. It's basically a butcher shop, but it's also a Texas market, and we make all of our own tallow. And I think ghee.
Talk about the pros of using beef tallow.
Beef tallow and ghee are both two high smoke point healthy fats, and they're going to help you increase your HDL and other things. The biggest factor with that, though, is going to be the source. So typically our toxins are fat soluble, right? They're stored in our fats. And so if you're eating or getting a source from a conventional cow, for lack of a better term, that's eating a lot of grains and having a lot of hormones and antibiotics and all that stuff's probably going to be in the beef tallow and be in that fat that you're consuming. So you want to make sure that if you are going to use beef tallow, that you're getting it and sourcing it from a source that is going to be healthy. That's going to be grass-fed, gas-finished, and pasteurized.
That's a great point, Brandon, because that we have another episode coming up talking about forever chemicals and GMOs. A lot of them get stored in the fat. And if there are farms that are using glyphosate and other chemicals for their weeds, and also have a high incidence of forever chemicals around the farm, it winds up in the animal and it gets stored in the fat. So you do have to try to look at where your ghee and your tallow is coming from. So we'll talk about that in a future episode.
So interesting point. McDonald's back in the day used to fry their French fries in beef tallow, and they were the most amazing French fries ever. And then at a certain point, they switched to seed oil. And my understanding, I'm not 100% sure if I'm correct on this, my understanding is that there was a lawsuit or a complaint or something of that nature because their French fries were being touted as being quote-unquote vegetarian, but they were being fried in beef tallow, and therefore they switched. So beef tallow is not a new thing. It's something that was used for years.
Been around forever. That's what we used to use. And the real story there that we're going to get into also with the chemical portion, the Toxic America portion, is that you look at the list of ingredients from those fries from the 1950s compared to today, and it's quadrupled. The old list was tiny. It was just basically potatoes, salt, and beef tallow, and now it's a whole list of preservatives and things that they've put in there that are not necessarily good for us. And that's across the board. We're not just picking on McDonald's. It's everybody. It's a lot of, like you said, for distribution purposes, shelf life, things like that. We've introduced a lot of chemicals into the food, and we're going to talk about all of those. But yeah, you're right. It changed, and the flavor changed, and so did the health of those, the relative health effects on people for those products. So.
Okay, next diet, the DASH diet, dietary approaches to stop hypertension. So this was developed to lower blood pressure. It's rich in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lean proteins, and low-fat dairy. And there's a focus on reducing sodium. So what do you think about that one, especially the low-fat dairy part, which kind of goes against the new food pyramid, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100% it does.
Goes directly against it, yeah. And typically that low-fat dairy means they're going to take the fat out of the dairy because it's not going to be full fat or natural, and they're going to put in preservatives or add sugar.
Yeah. And add vitamin A and D.
So again, more processed foods.
Yeah. Exactly. They take stuff out and put things in. Again, processing.
Next diet, vegetarian or vegan. What do you think?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
What do I think? I'm not going to villainize anyone's choices depending on why they decide to go vegetarian or vegan. Simply from a health standpoint, it becomes very difficult to get the adequate amount of protein that you need. It's possible, right? It's not that it's impossible, but it becomes very difficult to get the amount of protein that you need in order to sustain that diet. You have to eat large, just voluminous quantities of food to match the amount of protein that you need on those diets.
So it's a collision of two worlds, really, is what I'm hearing, Brandon. That you do have data. I mean, look, I was vegan for 3 years. And that's exactly what I struggle with. First of all, everybody's body is made differently, right? We all have, that's the beauty of independent assortment and genetics. We're all different. There are some people that thrive better than I did. I didn't thrive well at all. I struggled with a vegan diet. My teeth hurt all the time. My gums hurt. I didn't feel, at first I felt very clean and good. First 4 to 6 months, I felt really good. And after that, I struggled and felt tired. I was still working out a lot, and I didn't feel like I was getting the right amount of protein. And my in-body changed also. I had more visceral fat and less centripetal fat, but my muscle, in comparison, was lower. The muscle mass was lower. So my weight was under better control, but I struggled with it. So the China study talks about, it was the largest cross-sectional glimpse into diets that's ever been done. I think it was several 100,000 people. And it showed that the more rural and the more agrarian you were, the better your health outcomes were in general. So that spurred me on to go vegan. When you look at the later studies that are coming out, looking at carnivore diets and Mediterranean diet, it also looks like there's a commonality, not agrarian, but rural. So it really, the take-home point is that the stuff that you consume, like Brandon said before, you have to watch what it is, where it is, and what it's eating. So you have to watch what your food is eating and consuming, what it's made of. If you are eating lean meats, where did those meats come from? What are they being fed? Do they have toxins in them? That sort of thing. So in general rule for me is I want it to be pulled out of the ground or raised within a couple of 100 miles of me.
And what both of those studies seem to be showing is that the process of that food and the preservatives in that food are what are going to drive some of the negative health outcomes.
It's a factor. I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, next diet, the paleo diet. Emulates presumed pre-agricultural eating, meats, fish, fruits, vegetables, nuts, excludes grains, legumes, dairy, and refined sugar. What do we think?
Sounds pretty close to the current diet. It can be a current
for the
food
legumes,
pyramid,
right?
I should say.
Yeah.
Except the legumes. The only, I wouldn't even say downside, but a challenge that people have is it becomes somewhat restrictive. And this is with all labels. If you eat with a specific label, that label becomes sometimes a border to where you can get some healthy things into your diet. So when you look at paleo, restricting legumes, those things are actually high in fiber and typically good for you. And so that's where the labels come into issue.
The one thing I would add about that, with all of these diets, if you look, and you're going to have to zoom in, I know that you have the actual food pyramid pulled up, Brandon. You may want to zoom in at the very bottom of it. You'll see that there's a small section for scotch under there.
You got me with that.
Oh, how many servings a day are there? We can talk offline about it if you want.
And is a serving per kilogram, or is it still the palm?
It's definitely per kilogram. Although my wife defies that because she's only 100 pounds and she can drink me under the table. So
Here you go.
Okay, last diet, the ketogenic diet, probably the most popular right now. It's the buzz that everyone talks about. So just a little background on the ketogenic diet. It was actually developed in the 1920s as a potential treatment for epilepsy, believe it or not. And again, going back to that, as we decrease carbohydrate, we decrease inflammation. And so a ketogenic diet has actually been linked to decreasing the propensity for cancer, or even as a quote-unquote cancer treatment, as an adjunct, not by itself. Adjunct meaning as an additional therapy. Very, very popular. Brandon, can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, ketogenic diet is similar to the paleo diet, but it emphasizes more of the healthy fats and getting more fats into your diet to replace the carbohydrates. So it's very, very restrictive on the carbohydrate intake, and emphasizing more of the fats. Sometimes people go a little bit overboard. I would say overboard. People prioritize the fats so much that that can become an issue for them. But by and large, it's emphasizing lean proteins, healthy fats, reduction of added sugars, reduction of grains, and simple carbohydrates.
And so we have a whole nother episode that Brandon is involved in where we talk about intermittent fasting. And most people, as part of their ketogenic diet, are also engaging in intermittent fasting. So talk a little bit, I know we have another episode about it, but talk a little bit about the intermittent fasting part of this. Can you use intermittent fasting with other diets other than the ketogenic diet, or does it only work with the ketogenic diet, since that's what it seems to be linked to the most? Can you give us some information on that?
Intermittent fasting is typically linked to the ketogenic diet because it helps people get into ketosis over time by trying to burn through those glycogen stores in the muscle and liver. However, fasting has a host of health benefits and should be utilized with all diets by and large. But going back to intermittent fasting, that's going to be a process of intentionally fasting from macronutrients for a period of time, ideally 12 to 16 hours or sometimes longer, and then being intentional with what foods you bring back into your diet when you break your fast. So trying not to go to those simple carbohydrates, trying not to go to the cereals and the breads, the rices, the pasta, but focusing on lean proteins and healthy fats and fiber and vegetables when you do decide to break that fast. So if anyone can get a sense of kind of what the vibe here is that all of these healthy diets have something in common, and that's going to be proteins, vegetables, healthy fats, and also limiting grains and sugars, limiting those carbohydrates. And so it's not going to be about which individual diet is going to be best. It's about following a diet that has those principles tied to it.
Two things. Number one, how does that help with weight loss? This whole concept, how does that help with weight loss? Because we've been talking about how obese the population is and how there needed to be a change in the diet. How does this change physiologically help us lose weight?
So a couple of different ways. So protein is absorbed through facilitated diffusion. It takes a little bit of energy for our body to absorb that protein. So you're also burning a little bit of calories while absorbing protein. It also allows us to be fuller for longer. So it satiates us longer. So we typically don't overeat on protein the way we can do with carbohydrates. So your overall calorie intake is going to either be in line with what you need to maintain your body weight, or it's going to be a little bit less. Another factor is going to allow you to build lean muscle mass, which is also going to burn more calories at rest, which is again going to help us lose weight. So there are a couple of different ways that's tied to it. When you think about the fiber piece, that fiber is also going to be able to maintain blood sugar and insulin sensitivity over time, which is going to help shift us away from diabetes, pre-diabetes. So there are a multitude of different ways that this change in the food pyramid can help American society. It's just we got to take notice and make the right choices.
And my second question is vegetables. What's a good vegetable? What's a not so good vegetable? Because my understanding and the way I look at vegetables is green vegetables good, other colors bad.
What would be your other colors that you deem bad? Because cauliflower is a good vegetable. It's white, but it's a good vegetable, right? So it has a lot of fiber.
Right. So, it has fiber, but it lacks some of the other nutrients that we're kind of looking at when we're talking about how vegetables can be so good for you. But corn is a vegetable, correct?
Yeah, with corn, I would say hard no.
Right.
But
yellow peppers, any real benefit?
They have some different antioxidants. I would say there's no food that I would, other than GMOs and things like that, there's no food that I wouldn't say is inherently stay away from completely. However,
I like that. Moderation.
Eating because food is food. Every food has some level of nutrient value for us. unless it's manufactured and has all the processes to it. Natural food has some inherent value to us. The goal is going to be moderation and variety. If all you're doing is eating corn and yellow peppers and cauliflower, and you're missing out on the micronutrients and antioxidants that come from broccoli and asparagus and beets and all of the radishes and all those other different colored vegetables, that's where the problem lies. But
Lee, you're a green supremacist. You're discriminating against all the other incredible colored vegetables out there. I think it's terrible.
So I guess really the point is that people think, okay, I need to eat vegetables with whatever I'm making here. It's not that you need to have 7 different colored vegetables on your plate. It's just that at each meal, maybe switch to a different vegetable, so you're making sure that you're getting the nutrients from the entire class.
Correct. And making sure at every meal that you're having a lean protein, a healthy fat, and some fibrous vegetable. Every meal, not just at dinner.
I think that's the take home here. Is you really want to have moderation and balance, and whereas before what Brandon was saying was revolutionary and against the system, now it seems the system has righted itself, or in this case flipped itself to coincide with what experts like Brandon are telling us, which is that meat, lean protein's good, vegetables are good. You have to be balanced about everything you do, and we want to reduce the amount of empty calories that we take in the form of carbohydrate. I think that's the message, right?
Yep, very much so.
So I think it would pay to just talk a little bit in wrapping this up about what the buzz is out there about this food pyramid in terms of criticisms, because we know there are going to be a lot of criticisms to this as well. When something has been so long-standing and there's a lot of literature one way or the other, there are going to be the naysayers. So I'm going to go through a few of these things that I've read that people have come out with. The first is that the saturated fat messaging is contradicting and undermining cardiovascular guidance. What do you both think about that?
I would say that I believe is false. Again, sourcing of food, right? Where is that saturated fat coming from? How much of it are you having? And the quality of it is going to be the most important part.
Also, you have to look at this in context, Lee. You're talking about a diet that they were requesting us to intake 60% of it in the form of carbohydrate. When you have a massively saturated carbohydrate-based diet and you try to introduce saturated fats, to your point before, that's not going to be handled well by your body. So I think that writing that and reducing the carbohydrates down to a manageable amount and form is going to allow your body to handle good, unprocessed fats, both saturated and unsaturated, in a more physiologically pure manner, an efficient manner.
Okay, next one. There's an overemphasis on animal protein, and it misaligns with evidence on plant protein benefits.
I wouldn't say it's overemphasizing animal protein. It is just emphasizing protein. Animal protein is going to give you more bang for your buck than plant-based sources. However, that doesn't mean to eliminate plant-based sources from your diet. Fiber is going to be key. Antioxidants and things like that from vegetables are going to be key. So this food pyramid, if you look at it, the meats, so the proteins and healthy fats are right alongside vegetables at the top of the pyramid as the largest portions of the diet. So I would say that's also false.
I think it's false also. Look, we talked about George Catlin's book where he went out and lived with Native American cultures, which gave us a great window, pre and post-industrial revolution. It gave us a great window into a throwback hunter-gatherer society in its natural habitat. And from Canada down to Brazil, Native Americans did not eat any sort of plant material and any sort of carbohydrate. They existed purely on bison and venison for the most part. Some of them cultivated, would gather some berries and whatnot, but in general, they ate exclusively meat. and they lived well into their 70s and 80s, if his demographics are to be believed, which they typically are. So I think that you can take anything to its extreme, and certainly there's good data out there about vegetarian diets. But in general, humans have been carnivores, if not omnivores, and I think politically, people don't want to emphasize animals because of the amount of energy and land it takes to raise them. So I'm not entirely sure that statement comes from data as much as it does political activism. But I'm open to having my mind changed about that.
That actually leads into the next one: environmental and health trade-offs, possible conflict with sustainability science.
I think, again, that goes back to how we're treating our sources of animal protein, right? So when you think about sustainability, it shouldn't cost much more to have cows out in pasture eating grass and natural sources as it does to pump them full of hormones and antibiotics and house them in these places that aren't necessarily conducive to their natural environment. So the biggest trade-off would be you're not going to get as much money when you slaughter and sell that cow, because that cow is not going to be as large, but the actual production of that cow, there's no cost in the feeding, or lower cost in the feeding and raising of that cattle.
There's a lot of other animals out there besides cows that provide lean protein for a little bit less pasture required to sustain them. You can argue forever about which, but anything from kangaroo to alligator to venison, bison, you name it. There are many different ways at looking at the utilization of farmland across the world, and in the United States in particular. So we can probably get into that if we ever go into what I've turned my attention to the last 3 years, which is farming and raising pigs and cattle. I raise pigs myself on Redfield Ranch and butcher them and sell them at a cherry block in Katy, Texas. So I've been getting into this and seeing a little bit. There's a whole science behind how many acres it takes and how much water it takes and resources it takes to raise and slaughter these animals per person fed and per protein unit that it provides to people. But that's a different episode. But yeah, I think there are different ways to make this more quote unquote sustainable. But the question of whether or not animal protein is important is not a debate, really. I think that it's incredibly important, and I think that the science is behind it. The question is, how can we sort of make it politically amenable to the majority of the country?
Well, I think probably the biggest concern that people have is this is going to be more cattle, which means more environmental pollution. I think that's kind of the underpinning of that the methane and whatnot negatively impacts the environment, and we're just going to make things worse. But I will say,
yeah,
I will say, anyone that enjoys bacon, you have not had great bacon until you've had the bacon from Ben's Ranch.
It's like a different food group. It's just so good when you get
share,
and also
where people can go to get that stuff, because it's
redfieldranchtexas.com, but also at just here in Texas, it's at Cherry Block in Katy. You can order it from there to pick up, or you can we deliver to the 48 contiguous states. But the deal is that we don't just sell bacon, we sell pork belly. I love having pork belly in the morning. It's a little bit more like Canadian bacon, where it's not quite as salted and prepped. It takes us about 2 weeks to make our bacon, but our pork belly's ready pretty much out of the blocks. And to me, that's a breakfast. But I mean, and I've tried being a vegan and having a vegan type of subsistence, and I was never able to do it more than 3 years. Other people can, and I think that there's, again, a balance that can be struck. I think that we have a large enough nation with a varied enough a production ability where we can do this. We just have to get industry behind it, and see if they're willing to kind of change with the changing tide. And I think the changing tide started a few days ago when they introduced this new pyramid.
Okay, last criticism. Policy implementation concerns impact school and federal nutrition programs. So imagine all of these schools are going to have to change because they're going to have to go by federal guidelines, right? They're not going to be able to just go out on their own. This is going to cost a lot more.
This is massive. Yeah.
I actually think instead of a concern, that's a benefit. By and large, getting our youth and getting our children eating correctly and learning how to eat properly is the most important thing that we can do on top of educating them, because health is wealth. And once you learn how to eat and your palate kind of understands exactly what a plate of food should look like, getting away from the cereals and the grains and the simple carbohydrates and the juices and all of that kind of stuff, and more to a natural, healthy way of eating, it becomes sustainable long term. And so, yes, there is going to be some friction, right? There's going to be some cost and some friction in the beginning. But instead of that being a criticism, that should be looked at as a long-term positive.
And it's absolutely vital, because you're teaching those children how to maneuver the rest of their life. You're developing habits in grade school and beyond that are going to stick with them the rest of their life. So instead of having somebody like Brandon that's going to have to work to change what you've been doing your whole life to get you into better health, he's now going to be able to talk to you about other things that are going to make you a high performer, rather than just starting right from the basics, because you're already going to have a really healthy diet coming out of grade school and high school.
Well, I think the health insurance companies should fund this, because they're going to be the ones that are going to benefit the most from kids actually being healthy and creating healthy adults as well.
That's great, and because it does affect their bottom line, and only things that affect their bottom line really tend to change policy.
Well, guys, this was an amazing discussion. As always, we have 2 other podcasts that are going to be floating out there with Brandon Ward, who's been just a fantastic guest. So on behalf of Brandon, on behalf of Ben, we thank you for tuning in to this episode of Vital Discourse, and we can't wait to see you next time.